the financial crisis that is coming, and what is, and also what happened in 2008 and why it's going to happen again. And I'm going to try to keep it as simple as possible. A lot of the things you're going to see may not be exactly true to scale, so to speak. Now, what's the sword for? Well, this is just eye candy. This is my pet sword destructor. I call it that for a reason. I like to break things with it. So, right here is our bank. Okay, so just remember, this is the bank. This is the general public. Okay, and then this is the national deficit. I'm in Canada, but that doesn't matter. This is because almost every bank is doing the same thing. So our banker has, we'll use a quarter. Our banker has a quarter. Now, he loans it to the general public. But this is debt-based currency, and there's interest on that. So when the general public goes to pay back to our bank, he now owes 5 cents interest. Now, the problem with this is that this 5 cent interest, that 5 cents doesn't exist yet. So even if our little guy tries to give it back to the bank, he can't. Why? He can never pay that interest. It doesn't exist. So here's what the banker has to do. He has to loan out another 25 cents, okay, so that the money will get into circulation, and eventually maybe it'll exchange hands between these two people. And then what will happen is he can get his 30 cents back. But however, there's another interest of 5 cents that doesn't exist yet. So what he does is he puts more money into circulation. Now, the more he does this, and the more our debt goes up, the more worthless this money becomes. Now, after, let's say this is a year's time, well, now there's compound interest on that. Okay, so now, and he will even it out to a whole dollar. Okay. Yeah, more compound interest. Okay, after the first year. And this just keeps going and going and going. So I guess you now understand that point of it. So here's where it gets really bad. This compound interest, which doesn't exist yet, you end up, compound interest on the compound interest, which maybe at the end of the year might be an extra dollar. So when we look at it, okay, the interest is worth more than the initial loan. It's physically impossible to pay that back. Meanwhile, this is okay for the bank. Why? Because even if our bank, say, has that much money in there, which is enough to cover all this, that's okay for him because, let's say this defaults and they don't pay it back. Okay? Here's what happens. This does not default on the bank because they're not loaning out their own money to begin with. They're printing money out of thin air and basically loaning it out the thing. So who pays this? Well, the general public does. This is our national debt, remember? And again, this is not the scale. There's a lot of things I have to leave out just because it's too complicated to explain. So now they're going to put, he's safe because he gets the bailout from the government. So he gets all his money back. Hell of a scheme, isn't it? Now look at all this money he's got. And guess what he's going to do? That interest is still there. And there will probably be compound interest on that. He's going to put it back out again. Okay, you're getting the idea now. And then, of course, there's hyperinflation. All that stuff is going to get into there. And we'll call this the Greek method. And they default. It goes back over here. If they own that, doesn't matter because the banker gets bailed out. Meanwhile, that debt still exists. Okay. Now, maybe you're watching this and say that doesn't happen. Just about every country in the world is doing this. So, again, after a bailout, and maybe there might be some austerity like they're doing here in Canada. They tried it in France, but then they re-elect a government that's going to do it again. But you get the idea of what's going on here. This is the Ponzi scheme. Okay, this is how it works. So this is our bank, who has really no risk to themselves. This is the John Q. Public, who's completely broke, and this is what they owe because of these people. Now, how do we fix all this? Well, there is a couple of ways. Number one, banks should not be allowed to print money, and they should only be allowed to lend money out of their own vaults, meaning they cannot default and have the public bail them out. Banks should be allowed to fail. So hopefully this will give you just the very basic of what's happening. And the more money you throw into here, into the John Q. Public, as debt, the bigger the deficit is going to get. We'll call this the U.S. deficit of $15 trillion. Okay? why this is so dangerous is that this can never be paid back. And when you can't be paid back and they can't bail these guys out, they collapse. So what happened in 2008? Well, this is exactly what happened in 2008. Once the debt got big, okay, the bankers said, oh yeah, take as much as you want, borrow as much as you want, don't worry, we'll keep the interest rates low. Well, what, you don't have good financial credit? That's okay. What, you've never had a job before? Don't worry, we'll give you a credit card. Run it up, don't worry. We'll default it. Okay, pay us back now. And that's your crash. And when the bankers got you by the short and curlies like that, it's really hard to get out of that debt paradigm. This is basically the worst case scenario of what's happening. But people will see it come back in either hyperinflation or an all-out collapse. For example, we'll use Greece and Spain. Greece is seeing the worst of both cases. They're seeing the collapse of it. If they get out of the euro, they have to start from scratch, meaning everybody gets fired and they start over the next day and they have to build up from the ground up. If they stay in the euro, well, then there's major austerity, which we're seeing. I mean, people don't understand how desperate it is. I mean, about a month or so ago, there was an old man who walked out in the middle of the town square, blew his head off in Greece, and he blew his head off and basically wrote a note, well, he's too old to start over again. And they took basically, austerity. They took that and they reaped all his pensions and stuff like that. And the suicide rate in Greece is astronomical. Now, the rioting and stuff like that, well, Gerald Celente said it best. When people lose everything, they lose it. So the difference between North America and Europe is night and day. We're different cultures, And the thing is when people lose stuff here, that's why they're gearing up for martial law in the United States, is that if it does collapse, there's a lot of things going on in the States right now that could lead to a civil war or martial law. But a collapse would definitely lead to major chaos, and almost everybody's armed. And not just with swords, but like with actual rifles and stuff like that. So that's what the government is fearing, a major uprising. And kid yourself not, an uprising will happen. You wake up one morning, you go check your bank account, and everything's been taken out of it because these guys were greedy. You're going to be mad. And trust me, everybody that's out there that's in the bubble that doesn't think anything bad's going to happen, and people like me are just nut jobs, I've explained it to you as simply as I can. The details might be a little different, but that's the basic what is going on. And if you think I'm wrong, just look into it for yourself. I tell people, don't believe a word I say. Look into it. And when you look into it, you can choose to deal with it. On the grand scheme of things, you can't really do much as a little guy. You can't change policies. You can't make them do the right thing. But what you can do is kind of recession-proof yourself, and more importantly, depression-proof yourself by putting food away. That's the big one I keep. I made a video a couple of days ago saying that, okay, I'm a kind of a half-ass prepper where I prep. Well, I'd like to retract that statement. I do prep quite a bit. It's just I know what resources I have. I know what resources are in my town. And none of it I have to steal. None of it I have to take. All I have to do is educate and share. That's all I got to do. And for me, it's about farming. That's the key. Every country on the world is only as strong as its farming community. Food is the key. If you have food, law of threes, 3 minutes without air, you die. 3 days without water, you typically die. 3 weeks without food, you typically die. And then everything from there is pretty much a plus. So as long as you can cover the very, very basics, everything goes better. But again, if we call this Spain, right now Spain has nothing. Okay? And that means no health care, no social assistance, no retirement, no law enforcement, military are not getting paid. Therefore, there's rioting in the streets, there's looting, depression is on the high, and the suicide rates in Greece and Spain are like, it's just devastating to talk about. Why should we care over here in North America? Well, again, we're in the bubble. Till it hits people in the pocket, nobody cares. But here's the thing. We have a lot to lose here. And, it's big. So anyway, I just thought that would kind of explain things to people so that they might be able to understand how far down the road it is, how dark it is, as Jesse Ventura would say. But just, whether this is done purposely, which I do believe greed has a lot to do with it, but I think stupidity has more to do with it. And, whether it's a global elites or not, well, if this is the way they're doing it, they're not very elite, because you have to let the little guy get wealthy in order to get the big guy even wealthier. And if they can't figure that out, that it's about small business, farming, and at local levels being wealthy, then any scheme they come up with is just going to simply fail, because this is going to sound kind of odd, but the best way for everybody to get rich is for everybody to be honest. Hello. I'm going to try to explain the financial crisis that is coming, and what is, and also what happened in 2008 and why it's going to happen again. And I'm going to try to keep it as simple as possible. A lot of the things you're going to see may not be exactly true to scale, so to speak. Now, what's the sword for? Well, this is just eye candy. This is my pet sword destructor. I call it that for a reason. I like to break things with it. So, right here is our bank. Okay, so just remember this is the bank. This is the general public. Okay, and then this is the national deficit. I'm in Canada, but that doesn't matter. This is because almost every bank is doing the same thing. So our banker has, we'll use a quarter. Our banker has a quarter. Now, he loans it to the general public. But this is debt-based currency, and there's interest on that. So when the general public goes to pay back to our bank, he now owes 5 cents interest. Now the problem with this is that this 5 cents interest, that 5 cents doesn't exist yet. So even if our little guy tries to give it back to the bank, he can't. Why? He can never pay that interest. It doesn't exist. So here's what the banker has to do. He has to loan out another 25 cents, okay, so that the money will get into circulation, and eventually maybe it'll exchange hands between these two people. And then what will happen is he can get his 30 cents back. But however, there's another interest of 5 cents that doesn't exist yet.